Welcome to the podcast of All Means All. In this episode, Frank J. Müller and Silvia Dell'Anna will talk about differentiation.
What is differentiation?
Differentiation is a pedagogical approach to teaching and learning that's about engaging students through their various levels of need. That really is about increasing meaningful learning, and it's about encouraging motivation for students to participate in the learning process. It's being responsive in your teaching through 4 different big ways. One is through content, differentiating the process of the learning, differentiating the product, and how you assess students' learning. So it's examining all the dimensions of student learning and being able to plan it effectively, considering the limitations that can exist for how practice develops. But it's possible at every level of learning, it's possible in every subject of learning. In fact, it's necessary at every level in every subject. Differentiating your learning environment, differentiating the materials that you use. And one of the reasons it's so important is that it encourages positive learning environments, but it also increases students' self-determination, and overall it increases their engagement in the learning process.
What does differentiation look like in the classroom?
Differentiation looks different in every classroom because it's not a one-size-fits-all approach to teaching. It's responding to the students that you have in front of you. So differentiation will look different depending on the age of the students, depending on the content area that you're teaching the students in. It's also important to consider the profiles of those students and how those profiles then impact what kind of teaching styles you might use. It's important to know that differentiated classrooms, while they look different, they are using common strategies and common practices that will be put in place, regardless of the age of the content area. And it's about making sure that classrooms are proactive. You have teachers that are intentional about their practice. They know deeply their student population. They use assessment data to make sure that their teaching is as responsive as necessary for the students that they have in front of them. Another thing about differentiation is that you're flexible. So it's evolving over time. It's changing with the students as they're learning, as they progress through a year, as they progress through their understanding, as they master their goals. Some of the flexibility in differentiation comes from using different kinds of groupings, for example. So you might have a whole class group working on a project. You might have a small group working on a project. You have opportunities for one-to-one. You have opportunities for independent study. So you're able to be flexible in how the groups within the class work. You can also be flexible in how the time and the space is used in the class. So moving away from the idea of the teacher being in the front and the students being at the back and they're gathering the knowledge, that you're flexible in using the time within the class for students to gather information and bring it back to present to the group. Or students are working on independent studies that they then share out in a different session later on. You can be flexible about how the space is used as well, that maybe we don't dedicate all of the tables in an early childhood setting to a worksheet-based activity. Maybe it's that there's a lot more space for students to work or use materials as they want. Another way that space and time can be used flexibly in the class is about allowing some students longer amounts of time to finish an assignment, or allowing multiple check-in points for students who are working on a task. So you have the flexibility to say, I'm going to see where these students are in their learning and meet them there. We're also flexible in differentiation around how we use materials. So materials might be that you have a wide variety of different kinds of materials available to students at any time. And it might be that you're studying a lesson on bees, for example, and you have textbooks about bees, but you also have video about bees, and you have audio recordings about bees, and you have manipulatives about bees. You have all the materials around one topic that then allows flexibility for how those materials are used based on the students' profiles, based on the students' level of need, so that you can make sure that every student has a point of access into that topic. Also, we're considering the very, very necessary idea of flexibility with choice. So students are given choice in how they access the material that they need to know or how they show their learning, allowing opportunity with choice with final products, for example, where students can give a report or they can take an exam or they can share out to everyone in the class a presentation, or maybe they record it beforehand and it's something that the whole class gets to see, or the teacher alone gets to see. But there's choice involved in how students share the knowledge that they've gained in this unit of study that they've done. And that might look different for different age levels. That might look different for different content areas, but there's still the element of choice, which allows for that flexibility that's necessary with differentiation. Another area that is flexible that we are always evolving with is how we use questions. So how our questioning is set up in order to allow students access points into an area. So we might begin a topic with discussing, what do we know about forests? What do we know about how forests work? And you might have a group of students that's where they stay and their learning is always on that level. You might have a group of students that need to come down to what makes up a forest? What do we mean by that? You might have a group of students that can move past that and talk about what are the different kinds of that? How do we determine the differences between what forests are? What makes up a forest? And as your questioning evolves with the groups, you see that differentiation is possible as these students are then moving down different tracks of their learning, all towards the goal around this topic area, or this big question that we've started out by asking. So your questioning, and is again with different age levels, changes. So very small children, it's possible to do as well. You're differentiating all the time with where learners are. Very high levels, similarly. As the teacher, you need to know intimately the profiles of your students as well as the content area so that you can quickly and effectively alternate how you question. But it's also intentional. It's not happening in the moment. You've planned it out, you've thought through that intentionality, the proactive piece of, I know these students and I know where they need to go so that my questioning can bring them there. Lastly, we can think about the differentiation process in how we assess student learning. So what kind of flexibility do we have in the product that students create? When we're always asking students to complete an exam, we're not allowing them to show all the ways that they've learned the information that we've asked them to learn. So when we differentiate a product, we're looking at what students know, how can they show us what they know? Are they going to show us individually? Are they going to show us in groups? Will it be something where they work on something for a very long period of time and show the breadth of their knowledge or the depth of their knowledge? How can we make sure that we are able to accurately measure all of the things that students have learned, which exams can't give us that whole picture? So when we're differentiating product, we're differentiating the ways that students show us all that knowledge, and that can more accurately show us how we can truly measure student success.
Why is differentiation important?
Differentiation is a perfect example of a teaching approach that puts into practice the principles of inclusive education. This is true for two main reasons. On the one hand, it considers the globality of each pupil's learning profile, including not only curricular competencies, but also social, emotional skills, life skills, motivation, and interest. This way, it ensures full accessibility, it responds to individual needs, and it supports the overall development of every student. On the other hand, differentiation tries to balance individual needs with the effort to create a learning community in the class group or in the school context. Therefore, attention is also paid to social participation and to the quality of relationships in the classroom.
How do assessments support differentiation?
Assessment is a key moment when differentiating instruction. Collecting information on the global profile of all pupils is a necessary step to choose the most appropriate teaching strategies and to plan your units effectively. During the implementation of the teaching unit, the teacher needs to monitor the pupil's progress and the overall benefits of the learning experience. At the end of the unit, the teacher reflects on the whole unit and, thanks to the information collected, assesses its effectiveness and tries to improve the teaching plan.
What kind of information do we need to collect to plan future lessons, and how do we do it?
The type of information required to draft the individual learning profile of each student depends on multiple factors. Firstly, it depends on what kind of objectives the teacher intends to pursue, and secondly, on the specific aspects that are related to the class group or the context, the social context. In addition, in addition to information on the students' knowledge and skills in the curricular areas, the teacher could, for example, decide to collect information on social skills, on interests, and on relationships in the class group. Much, therefore, depends on the teacher's decision, on their reflections, and on their creativity as well. Similarly, the teacher has a variety of tools at their disposal to obtain this information, such as individual interviews, questionnaires, or observation, and can select the most appropriate ones according to the situation, for example, according to the age of the pupils or according to the resources and the opportunities that are available in our context. How do we select goals for our teaching?
So that's not that easy, because on the one hand we have the nationwide or statewide curriculum, and this needs to be transferred into a local context. So mostly there are also then school-wide curricula that are formed. So we need appropriate targets for each student, and the question is, how do they relate to the national curriculum? And how are they related to the current competencies and the interests of the students? And so we need to balance this. As we showed earlier in the assessment part, we have the conditions of learning that have been assessed, and now we need to make sure that the learners are not under-challenged, but also not over-challenged with the goals that we select for them. What is important is that students with completely different learning needs need also different goals, for example, if they learn together. So in inclusive classrooms, not every student has to achieve the same goal. On the same side, we have to make sure that we select appropriate goals for everybody and do not limit our students just because they have a challenging situation or individual support needs. So it can be that all of our students achieve the same goals if they have more time, more space, more support structures. So we have to be very careful when deciding who is going to do what in our classroom.
How do our goals relate to social skills?
Yeah, in Germany some years ago we had a shift from those subject-based competencies to a model that includes social skills, personal skills, the subject skills, and also subject crossing skills, like, okay, how to present information, for example, stuff like this, or how to act in certain ways. And it's important to keep the subject-related goals in mind, but at the same time, I think for education, it's important to ensure that our students develop a personality that enables them to collaborate with others, to understand others, to build empathy. And so a lot of stuff that was mentioned in the other chapters, like in the anti-bias education, for example, or in other parts of the book, it's social competencies that needs to be developed, because it's not only about creating machines that can solve mathematical problems, but it's to educate the future generation and to make sure that they are able to interact with others and to get along with others. Another part is, for example, to express your needs and to ask for support if you need support, and develop autonomy. And as we can see in the graphics for the social skills, it's a broad range of social skills, and we have to make sure that we pick social goals as well that are reachable for the students. And at the same time, we need to differentiate those goals as well. So it might be a different social goal for a student with challenging behavior as for a rather quiet student who is rather not speaking to others.
How can we include students' perspectives such as needs and interests into the selection of goals?
Yeah, I think that is an important question because the selection of goals shouldn't be something that is just based on the curriculum or the teacher's perspective of what is important and what is not important, because it also relates to the question of motivation and therefore also to the effectiveness of learning. And if we speak to our students, what is important for you, what topics are important or interesting for you, it can be one-on-one situations, or it could be a group situation where you ask students to write down what topics they find interesting. Or it can be mentoring models where you have a personal mentor for each student who's in connection to the students. Then you have the opportunity to decide goals that are more relevant for students than goals where you would just thought as a teacher, well, let's do that because I find this interesting. Also, for example, if we have students that do not communicate verbally, we have to think about, okay, how can we find out what is important for them? And also to speak to the parents, to speak to other students who might know the student better than we do, to find out, okay, what do they enjoy and where can we connect to the student? Because it's basically about that, connecting to the student, and you make an offer and then you will see if the student accepts this offer of education or if they don't. And if you know what they like and how they relate to things, it's more likely that they accept your offer of education. We have one example from progressive secondary schools in Germany, and they have rooms for teaching math, teaching German and teaching English. And at the beginning of the school day, students can decide, okay, today in these 3 hours I want to do math. And I go to the math room and there are modular contents for math, and there's a math teacher and you can ask him or her if you need support, and all the kids in this room are dealing with math questions. And you can also ask other students for support because it's age mixed groups, so it's very likely that there are students who already dealt with this module that you are working on. And that is quite interesting because it gives the student the opportunity to decide what are my goals, what do I want to achieve today. And it's a very different approach than the standard, okay, I'm the teacher, I'm setting the goals, and we are going to do this today. And what's interesting is then you need also different forms of assessment, because then you cannot write the same test for everybody, because if everybody is working on different parts, then it's more complex. So what they are doing is they have tests at the end of each module, and the students take the test if they feel ready to take the test, and they go to the teacher and say, well, I would like to take the test. Then they write it and then they get a feedback. And what's interesting is that they can also retake the test, because basically it's about learning the content. And if you need more time, then you need more time, but the goal is still to learn the content. So that's a different way of approaching this. I think the differentiation is then partly managed by the students themselves, by saying, okay, this is what I find interesting at the moment, and what they do is they document what they're working on, and they have the obligation to work some hours of math and some hours of German and some hours of English each week, and they have these mentoring feedback sessions, and if the mentor realizes, okay, this student was only in the German class for 3 weeks, then they get the feedback, okay, please do some math, please do some English. But in general, they can decide what they want to do.
Thank you for listening to the podcast of All Means All. In the show notes, there is a link to the chapter in the open textbook. There you can find the transcript of the video and more information on the topic.